I'm sorry, I wore my work uniform, the nurse said on a blind date. Then the single dad's reaction changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Kelsey Hart was rushing through the doors of Taco Libre in Austin, Texas at 7:43 on a Friday night, still wearing her hospital scrubs and having a full-blown internal debate about whether she should just turn around and go home because showing up to a first date 45 minutes late while still wearing her hospital scrubs was probably the worst impression she could possibly make. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop with apologetic texts she'd been sending to Dylan, the guy she was supposed to meet at 7, and she'd already typed out 3 different versions of, "I'm so sorry, but I need to reschedule," before deleting each one, because this was the third time in 2 months she'd canceled plans last minute. And her coworker Jenna, who'd set this whole thing up, had specifically told her, "If you bail on this one, I'm never setting you up again. Dylan's a good guy and you need to at least give him a chance." The problem was Kelsey had been about to leave the hospital at 6:30 when a trauma came in, a motorcycle accident with multiple injuries, and as an ER nurse, she couldn't exactly walk out in the middle of someone's life or death situation just because she had dinner plans. She'd scrubbed out at 7:30, checked her phone to find 2 texts from Dylan saying, "No worries, take your time, and I'll grab us a table," and she'd made the split-second decision to just go straight there instead of driving home to change. Because by the time she got to her apartment and showered and put on real clothes, it would be past 8:30. And that felt even worse than showing up looking like she'd just walked off a 12-hour shift, which technically she had. Her scrubs were wrinkled and had a coffee stain on the sleeve from this morning. Her hair was falling out of the bun she'd thrown it in at the start of her shift, and she was pretty sure she still smelled like antiseptic in hospital cafeteria. But she forced herself forward before she could talk herself into leaving. She immediately spotted Dylan sitting at a booth near the window, and she knew it was him because Jenna had shown her exactly one photo and told her, "He's got dark hair, blue eyes, works with his hands, so he'll probably be in jeans and a work shirt, super down to earth. You'll like him." He was scrolling through his phone and had a half-empty beer in front of him, and Kelsey's stomach twisted with guilt because this poor guy had been sitting here alone for almost an hour waiting for her, and she was about to give him every reason to walk out. She walked over to the table and Dylan looked up, and before he could say anything, Kelsey launched into the apology she'd been rehearsing in her head for the past 15 minutes. The words coming out in a rush, like if she said them fast enough, it would somehow make the situation less mortifying. "I'm so sorry I wore my work uniform. I look completely awful. I know I'm super late, and I should have just canceled, but I got stuck with a trauma case, and I couldn't leave, and then I thought about going home to change. But that would have made me even later, and I totally understand if you want to just leave because this is probably the worst first impression ever, and I'm sorry," Kelsey said without taking a breath. And she was already mentally preparing for Dylan to make some excuse about having an early morning or needing to pick up his kid, because that's what every other guy had done when her job got in the way. But Dylan didn't stand up to leave or check his watch or give her that tight smile that meant he was annoyed, but trying to be polite. Instead, he actually stood up and gently held up his hand like he was stopping traffic, and his voice was calm and genuine when he spoke. "Hey, stop. You just spent however many hours saving somebody's life. Sit down, I'll get you a drink." "You don't need to apologize for that," Dylan said, and his expression was so sincere that Kelsey literally froze mid-anxiety spiral because that was not the response she'd been expecting. She stood there blinking at him for a second while her brain tried to process what was happening, and Dylan gestured to the seat across from him. "Seriously, sit. You look like you're about to fall over. When's the last time you ate anything?" Kelsey sat down more out of shock than agreement and said, I had half a granola bar around 2. And Dylan shook his head and walked to the bar to order, leaving her sitting there completely thrown off balance. He came back 2 minutes later with a large glass of water and a margarita, set them both in front of her and said, "Drink the water first. You're probably dehydrated. The margarita's for after." And Kelsey just stared at him because in her experience, guys didn't do this. They didn't care about whether she'd eaten or if she was tired. They cared about whether she was going to be fun and available and not constantly ditching them for work. Dylan slid back into his seat and took a drink of his beer. So motorcycle accident, did they make it? And Kelsey found herself nodding. Yeah, he's stable, broken leg and some road rash, but he'll be okay. We had to run a bunch of scans to make sure there wasn't internal bleeding. And Dylan leaned forward like he was actually interested. That's incredible. I can't even imagine dealing with that kind of pressure. How long have you been an ER nurse? They fell into conversation and Kelsey kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Dylan to check his phone or make a comment about how her job must make dating hard or ask if she was always this much of a mess. But he just kept asking real questions and listening to her answers like they actually mattered. She learned that he owned a small electrical contracting business, mostly residential work, but some commercial jobs. And he'd built it from the ground up over the past 8 years, after working for someone else taught him everything he didn't want his own company to be. I've got 3 guys who work for me now. We do good work and treat people fair. It's not fancy, but it pays the bills, and I get to be my own boss, Dylan said, and there was pride in his voice, but not arrogance, just the satisfaction of someone who'd worked hard for what they had. When Kelsey asked if he had kids because Jenna had mentioned something about him being a dad, Dylan's whole face softened in this way that made her chest do something weird. Yeah, I've got a daughter, Piper. She's 7. She's pretty much my entire world. Kelsey asked about Piper's mom carefully because that could be a sensitive topic, and Dylan didn't flinch, just answered honestly. Her mom, Rachel, left when Piper was 2. She tried for a while, but being a mom wasn't what she thought it would be, and she couldn't handle it. So she moved back to California, and I've been doing the solo parent thing ever since. It's just me and Piper, and my mom helps out when she can. There was no bitterness in his voice when he said it, just matter-of-fact acceptance of his reality. And Kelsey appreciated that he didn't trash his ex or make it into some dramatic story. The food came and they kept talking, and somewhere between the street tacos and the second round of drinks, Kelsey realized she'd stopped apologizing and started actually enjoying herself. And when she checked her phone and saw it was almost 10, she couldn't believe they'd been sitting there for over 2 hours. Dylan noticed her checking the time and said, "You need to get going. I know you probably have an early shift tomorrow." And Kelsey shook her head. "Actually, I'm off this weekend for once. I just can't believe we've been here this long. I thought for sure you'd bail after I showed up looking like this." Dylan looked at her for a second and then said something that hit her harder than she expected. "Kelsey, I get what it's like when your life doesn't fit into neat little boxes. I run my own business and raise a kid by myself. Nothing about my schedule is normal either, and I respect the hell out of what you do. You don't need to apologize for being dedicated to your job." They walked out to the parking lot around 10:30 and stood by Kelsey's car, and she felt this weird nervousness that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with not wanting this to end. "I had a really good time tonight, even though I showed up late and probably smelled like a hospital," she said, and Dylan laughed. "You smelled fine, and I had a great time too. Can I text you? Maybe we could do this again when you're not coming straight from saving lives?" Kelsey nodded, probably too enthusiastically. "Yeah, I'd really like that." And when Dylan leaned in to hug her goodbye, it felt natural and warm, and like maybe this could actually be something. Kelsey drove home with her windows down, even though it was chilly, because she needed the air to process what had just happened. And she kept replaying Dylan saying, "You don't need to apologize for that," because nobody had ever said that to her before. Every other guy she'd dated had made her feel guilty for her schedule, or acted like her job was an inconvenience they had to work around. She texted Jenna when she got home. "Okay, you were right. He's great. Thank you for not giving up on me." And Jenna wrote back immediately, "Finally, I told you Dylan was different. He gets it because his life is complicated too. Now don't screw this up by overthinking it." Kelsey fell asleep that night, still in her scrubs because she was too exhausted to shower, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she didn't have to choose between her career and having someone who actually understood her. 3 weeks into dating, Dylan and Kelsey had already apologized approximately 47 times for various things that he kept telling her weren't actually problems. And she was starting to realize that her chronic need to say sorry for basically existing was becoming its own issue, but she genuinely didn't know how to stop doing it. Their second date had been at a movie, and she'd fallen asleep 20 minutes in because she'd worked a double shift the day before. And when Dylan gently woke her up during the credits, she'd immediately started apologizing, while he just laughed and said, "You needed the sleep more than you needed to see the ending. It's fine." Their third date she'd had to cancel 2 hours before because the hospital called her in to cover for someone who'd gotten food poisoning. And she'd sent Dylan a text that was basically a novel of apologies. And he just responded, "Stop saying sorry. We'll reschedule. Go save lives." By week 4, they'd fallen into this comfortable rhythm where Dylan would text her good morning, even though he knew she might not respond for hours. And Kelsey would send him random updates from work like, "Just pulled a Lego out of a kid's nose. It's been that kind of day." And Dylan would respond with equally random updates from job sites like, "Client asked if I could make their chandelier play music. People are wild." They'd grab late dinners when Kelsey got off shift. Sometimes she'd still be in scrubs, and Dylan never once commented on it, except to ask if she'd had a rough day. And Kelsey kept waiting for him to get tired of her unpredictable schedule, but he just kept showing up. The problem was Kelsey had been conditioned by every previous relationship to believe that her job was too much, that she was too much, and no amount of Dylan being patient and understanding could convince her brain to stop bracing for the moment he'd finally had enough. 6 weeks in, Dylan asked if she wanted to meet Piper, and Kelsey felt this weird combination of excited and terrified because meeting someone's kid felt significant in a way that made everything suddenly very real. They'd planned a casual Saturday afternoon at Zilker Park, nothing formal, just hanging out, and Kelsey had changed her outfit 3 times that morning before settling on jeans and a t-shirt because she didn't want to look like she was trying too hard. Piper turned out to be this spunky 7-year-old with her dad's dark hair and a gap-toothed smile, and she'd looked Kelsey up and down when they met and said with zero filter, "Are you Dad's girlfriend? He said you work at a hospital. Do you really see blood and stuff?" Kelsey had laughed and knelt down to Piper's level. "I am his girlfriend, and yeah, I see blood sometimes, but mostly I just help people feel better when they're sick or hurt." And Piper's eyes had gone wide like Kelsey had just revealed she was a superhero. They'd spent the afternoon playing on the playground and getting snow cones, and Piper had talked nonstop about school and her best friend Bailey and how she was learning to ride her bike without training wheels. And Kelsey found herself genuinely enjoying this kid's company in a way she hadn't expected. Dylan watched them together with this soft expression that made Kelsey's stomach flip. And when Piper asked if Kelsey had her stethoscope in her car because she wanted to hear her own heartbeat, Kelsey actually did and let Piper listen while explaining how hearts worked. On the drive home, Piper announced from the back seat, "I like her dad. She's cool and she didn't talk to me like I'm a baby." And Dylan had reached over and squeezed Kelsey's hand. And she'd felt this overwhelming sense of fitting into something she didn't know she'd been missing. But even with things going well, Kelsey couldn't shake the apologizing habit. And it got worse the more comfortable they got because now she wasn't just apologizing for work stuff. She was apologizing for everything. She apologized when she couldn't make it to Piper's soccer game because she'd picked up an extra shift, apologized when she was too tired to go to Dylan's mom's birthday dinner, apologized when she fell asleep on his couch during a movie they were watching at his place. And every single time Dylan would say some version of, "Stop apologizing. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to have a demanding job. I'm not going anywhere." Kelsey wanted to believe him, but there was this voice in her head that sounded a lot like her ex-boyfriend Ryan that kept whispering, "He's just being nice now. Eventually he'll snap and tell you you're too much work." 3 months into their relationship, Kelsey got called into her nurse manager's office on a Tuesday morning, and she'd spent the walk down the hallway trying to figure out what she'd done wrong, because getting called to management usually wasn't a good thing. But when she sat down, her manager, Patricia, had smiled and said, "Kelsey, I want to offer you the charge nurse position on the evening shift. You've been here 5 years, you're one of our strongest nurses, and the team respects you. I think you'd be perfect for the leadership role." Kelsey had sat there stunned because this was huge. Charge nurse meant more responsibility and better pay, and the kind of career advancement she'd been hoping for. But it also meant even more hours and even less predictability, and the immediate thought that crashed through her excitement was, Dylan's going to leave. She'd asked Patricia for 24 hours to think about it, even though she already knew she wanted to say yes, and on the drive home, Kelsey's brain went to a place she'd been trying not to think about for months. Back to 2 years ago, when she'd been dating Ryan, and he'd started making comments about her schedule. Ryan had been in finance, worked normal 9 to 5 hours, and after about 6 months of dating, he'd started asking when she was going to look for a job with better work-life balance, suggesting she could do office nursing or maybe go back to school for something that didn't require nights and weekends. Kelsey had tried to explain that she loved emergency medicine, that it was her calling, not just a job, and Ryan had gotten increasingly frustrated until one night he'd actually said, "You're never going to have a normal life if you keep doing this. You'll always be alone because nobody wants to date someone who's never available." That fight had ended with Kelsey choosing her career and Ryan walking out, and he'd sent her a text a week later that said, "I hope it's worth it being married to your job." And Kelsey had cried for 3 days before deciding he was probably right, that maybe she was meant to be alone because her priorities were different. She dated casually after that, but never let anyone get close because she didn't want to go through that rejection again. Didn't want to hear another person tell her she needed to change who she was fundamentally to deserve love. And now here was Dylan, this incredible guy who'd been nothing but patient and supportive. And she was about to take a job that would make her even less available. And she couldn't shake the certainty that this would be the thing that finally made him realize she was too much trouble. Kelsey sat on that anxiety for 2 days before she texted Dylan and asked if they could meet for coffee. And when he showed up at their usual spot on Thursday afternoon, she could tell he knew something was up. By the way, she couldn't quite meet his eyes. They ordered their drinks and sat down at a corner table. And Dylan said, "What's going on, Kels? You've been weird since Tuesday." And Kelsey took a breath and just said it. "My manager offered me a promotion to charge nurse. It's more money and it's what I've been working toward. But it's also going to mean more hours and more responsibility and even less free time than I have now." She watched Dylan's face, expecting to see frustration or resignation. But before he could respond, she kept talking, the words tumbling out in a rush, fueled by panic and old wounds. "I'm taking the job, Dylan. I have to. It's my career and it's important to me. But I know what this means, and I'm not going to make you sit through me becoming even more unavailable than I already am. You and Piper deserve someone who can actually show up and be present and not constantly cancel plans or fall asleep or be too exhausted to function," Kelsey said, and her voice was shaking. "I'm sorry, I really am, but this isn't fair to you, and I think we should end this now before it gets worse and Piper gets more attached and everyone gets hurt." She watched Dylan's expression shift from confused to shocked to something that looked like hurt, and he set down his coffee cup slowly, like he was trying to process what she'd just said. "Wait, you're breaking up with me?" Dylan's voice came out rough. "Kelsey, I haven't even said anything yet. You just told me about a promotion and then immediately decided I can't handle it. Did I do something to make you think I'd react badly to this?" Kelsey felt tears burning behind her eyes. "No, you've been amazing, that's the problem. You've been so patient and understanding, and I keep waiting for you to hit your limit, and I can't watch you slowly start to resent me for choosing my job. I've been through that before and I can't do it again." Dylan reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "I'm sorry, Dylan. This is for the best. You'll find someone who can give you what you need, someone who's not constantly apologizing for existing." She stood up before he could argue, grabbed her bag and walked out of the coffee shop with her vision blurry from tears. And she didn't look back, because if she did, she'd lose her nerve. Kelsey drove home and cried in her car for 20 minutes before going inside. And she ignored the 3 texts from Dylan asking her to please just talk to him, because she knew if she responded, she'd cave. And this was the right thing to do, even though it felt like her chest was being crushed. She texted Patricia that night and accepted the charge nurse position. And when her coworker Jenna asked her Monday morning how Dylan had reacted to the promotion news, Kelsey had to tell her they'd broken up, and Jenna had looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You broke up with him? Kelsey, that man is crazy about you. What happened?" Kelsey just shook her head. "He deserves better than someone who's going to be working 60-hour weeks." It was the right call, but saying it out loud didn't make it feel any more true. 2 weeks without Dylan felt like the longest stretch of time Kelsey had experienced in years, and she'd thrown herself into her new charge nurse position with the kind of intensity that made her coworkers ask if she was okay, because working 60-hour weeks and volunteering for every extra shift wasn't normal even by nurse standards. She told herself she was just being dedicated to her new role, that this was what advancement looked like. But the truth was, she was using work to avoid thinking about how much she missed Dylan's good morning texts and his patient smile, and the way Piper had started calling her Nurse Kels, like it was the coolest title in the world. Jenna had stopped asking about the breakup after Kelsey snapped at her on day 5, but her coworker still gave her these looks that clearly said, "You're making a massive mistake, and you know it." And Kelsey just kept her head down and focused on patient charts. What Kelsey didn't know was that Dylan had spent those same 2 weeks trying to respect her decision, while also feeling completely blindsided by the fact that she'd broken up with him before he'd even gotten a chance to respond to her promotion news. And every single night Piper asked where Kelsey was and why she didn't come over anymore. Dylan had tried to explain it in terms a 7-year-old would understand. Something about how sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices about their jobs and their time. But Piper had looked at him with those sharp kid eyes that saw right through adult nonsense and said, "Dad, did you mess up? Because you always tell me to use my words, and it sounds like maybe nobody used their words here." That had hit Dylan harder than he wanted to admit, because Piper was right. Kelsey had made assumptions about how he'd react and never gave him the chance to actually tell her how he felt. Dylan talked to his mom about it on a Saturday morning when she came over to watch Piper, and his mom, Linda, had listened to the whole story before saying, "So let me get this straight. She got a promotion that she's been working toward for years, and instead of celebrating with you, she decided you'd eventually resent her. So she just ended it preemptively?" Dylan nodded, and his mom shook her head. "That girl's been hurt before. I can see it all over her. Someone made her believe that her ambition was a problem instead of something to be proud of. You need to tell her she was wrong about you." Dylan had said, "She made it pretty clear she doesn't want to hear from me." But his mom had given him that look she'd perfected over 35 years of parenting. "She's scared, Dylan. Scared people don't always make good decisions, but that doesn't mean you give up on them." On a Wednesday night at the end of week 2, Dylan did something that was either incredibly romantic or borderline stalking, depending on how you looked at it, and he texted Jenna, the co-worker who'd set them up in the first place, and asked when Kelsey's shift ended. Jenna had responded immediately with, "Finally, she gets off at 11 tonight. She parks in the south lot. Go get her." And Dylan had recruited his mom to stay late with Piper and driven to the hospital with absolutely no plan, except that he needed Kelsey to actually hear what he'd been trying to say 2 weeks ago. He parked near the employee exit at 10:45 and waited. And when Kelsey walked out at 11:15, still in her scrubs with her bag slung over her shoulder, looking exhausted, Dylan got out of his truck and called her name. Kelsey stopped walking and turned around. And even from 20 feet away, Dylan could see her face cycle through surprise and confusion and something that looked like hope before settling unguarded. "Dylan, what are you doing here? Is Piper okay?" Dylan walked toward her and stopped a respectful distance away. "She's fine. She's with my mom. I needed to talk to you and you weren't answering my texts, so I figured I'd come to you. Is that okay?" Kelsey shifted her bag on her shoulder and looked like she was debating between running to her car and staying, but finally she nodded. "Okay, talk." And her voice came out more defensive than Dylan thought she probably meant it to. "You broke up with me before I could even say congratulations," Dylan said, and he kept his voice level even though he'd been carrying this frustration for 2 weeks. "You told me about the promotion and then immediately decided I couldn't handle it. And you didn't give me a single chance to tell you how I actually felt about it. You just made assumptions based on whatever that last guy did to you and checked out before I could prove you wrong." Kelsey's jaw tightened and she looked away. "I was saving you the trouble, Dylan. I know how this goes. Eventually you would have gotten tired of me never being available, and you would have started making comments about my schedule, and we would have ended up here anyway. I just skipped the part where we both waste more time." Dylan took a step closer and his voice got softer. "Do you, though? Do you actually know how this goes with me? Because I was going to tell you I'm proud of you, that you earned that promotion because you're an incredible nurse and a natural leader. I was going to ask if you wanted to celebrate, And I was going to tell you that Piper had already started making you a congratulations card because she was so excited that you were getting recognized for being good at your job. Kelsey's eyes filled with tears and she pressed her lips together like she was trying to hold it together. And Dylan kept going because he needed her to hear all of it. I fell in love with you in Scrubs, Kelsey, exhausted and apologizing for being late. I didn't fall for some imaginary version of you with a 9 to 5 job and weekends off. I fell for the woman who saves lives and runs on 4 hours of sleep and still shows up. Dylan, I can't, Kelsey's voice cracked, and the tears started falling. I can't be what you need. I'm always going to be late and tired and distracted by work. I'm always going to have to cancel plans and miss things and choose the ER over everything else sometimes. And I've spent my entire adult life apologizing for taking up space and being too much, and I can't do that with you. I can't watch you slowly start to resent me for being who I am. Dylan closed the distance between them and gently took her hands. Then stop. Stop apologizing. Stop waiting for me to turn into someone I'm not. I'm not Ryan or whoever else made you feel like you had to choose between your career and being loved. I choose you, Kelsey, all of you, the 60-hour weeks and the scrubs and the falling asleep during movies. I don't want you to be less. I want you exactly as you are. Kelsey completely broke down at that, the kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in, and Dylan pulled her into a hug while she sobbed into his shoulder in the hospital parking lot at 11:30 on a Wednesday night. I'm so tired of being too much, Kelsey said through tears. I'm tired of feeling like I have to apologize for wanting both a career and a relationship. I'm tired of shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. And Dylan held her tighter. Then don't. Be as big as you want to be. Take up all the space you need. I'm not asking you to be smaller. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you're out here being amazing. They stood there for a long time until Kelsey's breathing evened out and she pulled back enough to look at him. I really messed this up, didn't I? And Dylan smiled. Yeah, a little bit, but we can fix it if you're willing to actually talk to me instead of making decisions for both of us. 4 months later, Kelsey was running late to Dylan's place after a particularly brutal shift, and she'd texted him, still in scrubs, haven't showered, bringing Thai food as an apology. And Dylan had written back, stop apologizing, just get here safe. She pulled up at 7:30 and grabbed the takeout bags, and before she could even knock, Piper threw open the door and shouted, Kelsey, you're in your uniform. Did you save people today? Kelsey grinned at the kid who'd somehow become one of her favorite humans. I did, Bug. Helped a guy who broke his ankle skateboarding and a lady who had a bad allergic reaction. It was a whole thing. Piper grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. That's so cool. I told my class you're basically a superhero, and my friend Emma said her mom's a nurse too. But I said mine's better. Dylan appeared from the kitchen and kissed Kelsey hello, and she leaned into him for a second, just breathing him in. You still apologizing for the scrubs? He asked, and Kelsey shook her head. Not anymore. You've trained me out of that one finally. They ate dinner as a weird little family unit that didn't look like anything Kelsey had imagined for herself, but felt more right than anything ever had. And when Piper was in bed and they were cleaning up the kitchen, Dylan said, my mom asked again when we're moving in together. I told her we're taking it at your pace, but she's relentless. Kelsey dried a plate and thought about it. Maybe after my 6-month review, I want to make sure I've got the charge nurse thing down before I add another big change. Is that okay? Dylan pulled her close. That's perfect. There's no rush. We've got time. Sometimes the right person doesn't need you polished and perfect. They love you exhausted and real and still wearing your work clothes because that's who you actually are. And Kelsey had spent so many years thinking she had to choose between her career and being loved that she'd almost missed the person who was trying to tell her she'd never had to choose at all. Dylan didn't want her to apologize for her ambition or shrink herself to fit into his life. He wanted to build a life big enough for both of them to be exactly who they were. And that was the kind of love worth showing up for, even when you're 45 minutes late in wrinkled scrubs. If this story reminded you that you don't have to apologize for taking up space or being dedicated to what matters to you, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment about where you're watching from and tell us about a time you almost gave up on something good because you were scared. We love hearing your stories. Thanks for being here with us. And remember, the person who's right for you won't ask you to be smaller. They'll celebrate you taking up all the space you need.